Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Hello, mate. It's very suspicious there. I'm going to translate that into suspicious thoughts around Valve, which matches up with the news because there's a new documentary. There's a new documentary doing the rounds that Mr. Jeff Keighley's put together called Half-Life: Alyx: The Final Hours, which sort of doubles as a deep dive into Valve's general mentality as a developer. And they've just talked about the reality of Half-Life 3, Left 4 Dead 3, and various other projects that they cancelled after Half-Life 2 Episode 2. And it's really, really fascinating. I obviously recommend it to everybody. I think it's $10 or something. But it seems like one of the most frank sort of interview sort of segments or most essential pieces of games media, because Valve are incredibly honest in it and just literally say, look, we've been, we have a really like crazy work ethic. I mean, the way that their offices work internally is that whatever project you want to work on, you kind of just can, and it means that people ping pong between different projects, and that means that a lot of things get started and don't necessarily get over the finish line. But also in Half-Life's case, the Source 2 engine they were working on apparently started to fall apart, which is one of the reasons why Half-Life sequels and Left 4 Dead got canned. But in regards to Half-Life 3, and I'll get to Left 4 Dead in a bit, there's some gameplay details because they did have sort of prototypes that they got off the ground. So apparently Valve at one point had 5 different projects, or have had 5 different projects post Half-Life 2 Episode 2 that all got scrapped, but they did have a Half-Life 3. And for Half-Life 3, they said it was a procedurally generated game where the story beats were preset, but the gameplay would turn out differently because building layouts and enemy placements were always randomized. Apparently Valve were aiming for a game that was highly replayable. That's according to Rock Paper Shotgun's write-up, based on the documentary. But what do you think of a procedurally generated Half-Life sequel?
It makes sense for when this game was being made, you know what I mean? Like around about 2013 or whatever. I feel like back then, procedurally generated kind of worlds and gameplay was like all the rage. Like this was the next big thing of how do we make our games replayable? How do we make it so people are constantly going back to these stories? And I think that's kind of the conclusion a lot of people landed on. However, I myself, especially when it comes to AAA games, I'm not a huge fan of procedurally generated content. No. I think, like you said, like the idea here was to kind of marry the authored, scripted story beats that were always going to be set in stone with kind of levels that were more nebulous and open to being replayed because they were procedurally generated and how they, positioned enemies or positioned objectives and stuff like that. I couldn't really imagine it, especially because like Half-Life 2 especially kind of feels so authored as a piece of kind of media from both the story to the characters to like the gameplay specific segments, you know what I mean? Like there are so many kind of levels in that game that are still iconic to this day, and I wonder whether you would have got that if you had this kind of approach and whether Half-Life 3 could have had the same impact. It's certainly kind of daring and different, but I think it wouldn't have been for me personally.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think procedurally generated stuff goes wrong more times than it goes right. I can only point to a handful of things, like on one hand, that I think actually like pulled it off in a way where you couldn't always see the seams. I always think with most of procedurally generated stuff, you can see the tile sets, the biomes that are being slot together to make the thing, and that ends up putting you off. But it's really fascinating in regards to procedurally generated narrative, because I know that that's something that apparently Ken Levine is working on. His next project, this is from Play, Watch, Listen. I forget the name of the episode, but in there, Austin Wintory and it's Austin Wintory, Troy Baker, Mike Bithell and Alana Pierce, and they talk about how they know that Ken Levine's working on something that is going to have a procedurally generated narrative. This has been the case for the last few years. Apparently it's what he went on to after Bioshock Infinite, because apparently according to him, he was saying that most first-person narrative-driven experiences are just Half-Life done again. He said we haven't meaningfully expanded from that, and he wanted to try procedurally generated narrative. So the idea that a certain number of story threads or characters or whatever are served up to you based on how you're playing is weird, because the developer gets to maintain authorship in terms of they're giving you the bucket of stuff in the first place, but could that still be as meaningful as a Last of Us, like something from a Naughty Dog or a Rockstar? I don't know, like where do you come down on the idea of applying like procedurally generated content to storylines?
That seems mad. I'm really interested in what Ken Levine is actually going to show off, because it's been a long time since Bioshock Infinite, and obviously, he went on to make his own studio and stuff, but we've barely heard anything about what that team's actually kind of coming up with. I think there was like an internal reboot, but even that was quite a long time ago. So if you can pull something off like a procedurally generated narrative, that again, it's interesting, and I would like to play something like that, because sometimes they do throw up gems and it can be done kind of well, this procedurally generated content. But I'm fully with you in that, for me at least, there are way too many kind of bad examples than good ones. And like you said, I feel like it's really difficult to not notice the seams and the kind of Frankenstein way a lot of the patches of content or gameplay or story are kind of stitched together. If you can kind of make that as I don't know, as elegant as possible, then it might be kind of interesting. It's one that I have to see to believe, though, you know what I mean?
Yeah, the thing, because obviously when you go back to Half-Life 2, like obviously they're great games, especially they're phenomenal games. But my thing with Half-Life 2 is always that it felt a lot like a tech demo. It was very much a proving ground for Havoc physics, and if you go back to it, there's especially in the early parts, there's a lot of you're going room to room, and it's like, here's this oil drum rolling down a hill, here's this plank of wood that we're going to break in half, here's these different sort of tech aspects that were mind blowing at the time. But when you go back to it, it does feel like a showcase for the tech in the best way possible. And I kind of wonder how much that is their ethos for Half-Life. If they went into Half-Life 3 going like, okay, we need this to be the next benchmark in a certain type of technology, and we're going to make sure that that is, procedurally generated narrative or a different approach to narrative. Hence why they waited so long, and then Half-Life Alyx became the benchmark for VR. Yes. And I kind of wonder if that's the way they were going to go with Half-Life 3.
I think it must have been because all of these cancelled games, but especially Half-Life 3 and the other Half-Life projects, seem to be centered around kind of like showing off the Source 2 engine and kind of like making it the kind of, like you said, almost not even a tech demo, kind of like just, I don't know, something that shows everyone exactly what the capabilities of this technology is, but in a way that kind of functions as a fully fledged experience. I have more or less just described a tech demo to you there, but you know what I mean? It's more robust, it's more, it's bigger. And I think that that is obviously why they didn't go ahead with it, according to this report, because they couldn't get that engine to kind of work properly, essentially. And when that went out the window, all the game kind of followed, especially because they couldn't get this procedurally generated content to kind of be as good as it should have been.
I think someday, I think that, like, obviously this information coming out is essential if you're a Valve fan. It highlights what happened for the last sort of 13-ish years and everything that happened after Half-Life Episode 2. But I kind of think this stuff could have been communicated beforehand. I know it's a different angle for a different video, but if they'd, communicated some of this stuff, I guess maybe they weighed it up in terms of saying like, hey, look, we're going to do Half-Life 3, and it started to fall apart, or maybe they want to wait until something is more fully formed, how Rockstar tend to, before they show everybody. Another game that's part of this report is Left 4 Dead 3. Apparently it would have been set in Morocco. Apparently it was going to be a fully open world. They would have ditched the sort of almost, I guess, corridor-esque approach to the other levels, or the level design that the other ones had. Hundreds of zombies on screen at once, which made me think of the Days Gone getting to sort of say they were the first massive crowd tech thing, I guess after Dead Rising, but in an open world setting, which sounds pretty good. But yeah, what do you think of, as you're a way bigger Left 4 Dead fan than me, I think.
Yes.
Mainly because I'm nothing on the scale of Left 4 Dead fans.
Well, we've done videos before on Left 4 Dead 3 and what it could have been and how it was cancelled and how it never came to be. And it's always been guttering, but according to this report, there have been 2 different Left 4 Dead projects. There was the original Left 4 Dead 3, then there was something codenamed Hot Dog, which actually has no details about it, but it was supposed to be another take on Left 4 Dead. So that's 2 Left 4 Dead projects, Scott Tilford, that I could have had that we haven't received, which kind of sucks. And it's interesting that they're kind of talking about all of this stuff now. Yes, the documentary's out, and yes, it's quite candid. But to me, I don't think they would finally tell you, just kind of more or less out the blue, about Half-Life, especially what Half-Life 3 could have been, if they didn't have something up their sleeve, you know what I mean? If they weren't working on something else to kind of surprise us with afterwards, because after kind of so much silence, it feels odd to just drop this now, like you said, kind of nonchalantly.
Well, there's 2 things to that. One, if you know how Half-Life Alyx plays out, there's a whopper. There's a big full-on large carp at the end of that game to sort of lead you somewhere else. And also, this report or the documentary rather, ends by saying that Valve do have another top secret project that they've been working on since 2018. So whether that's PC only, whether it's Vive only, or whether that's coming back to consoles, it's weird. Whenever I go back to Valve, I remember how much I miss them. Like Portal 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. They're just such a supreme studio studio, and it's a shame that they haven't been more active in the console space. They've pretty much just slept through an entire generation. Like, they managed to get Alex out the door and a bunch of Vive stuff, but like, you know, it's just, they're kind of sorely missed, I would say anyway.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's almost like we've been in this industry for a while now, or at least reporting on the industry for a while now, and it kind of feels like I don't even think of modern Valve as the same people who made all of those games. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And I never really expect to see a third Portal or a third Left 4 Dead or a third Half-Life. It just kind of seems completely out of the question at this point, which kind of sucks, because when they come back and they do make a game like Half-Life Alyx, which is obviously a showcase for this virtual reality technology, it's really good, and like you said, it does have those major story beats that reminds you that this is very much a part of this world, and this is a story that they care about and we care about, and we want to see kind of more. So from what they've been talking about in regards to Alyx specifically, and like you said, there is a top secret project that's been in the works since 2018, you have to hope they're kind of getting back in the saddle, I suppose, like ready for, and I know they're on kind of like PC and Steam, obviously, so they're not really bothered too much about console generations, but it feels like a nice point to perhaps get back into it now while this generation is winding down and people are getting more kind of interested in gaming in general, I suppose.
Yeah, hopefully now that they've got the Source 2 engine perfected or whatever, and you've got the, you know, the extra power that comes with the next generation of consoles, you can kind of marry the two, and hopefully we'll see a return to Valve on consoles. Yeah, it's been a long time coming. Let us know what you think down in the comments, though. Would you have liked a procedurally generated Half-Life 3, and what would you have done, or what would you have thought about an open world Left 4 Dead sequel? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
I will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.